The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures.
He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul.
He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake.
Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me.
Your rod and your staff, they comfort me.
You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies.
You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows.
Surely your goodness and love will follow me all the days of my life.
And I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever.
We've spent the past 2 weeks so far in this series called The Abundant Life, where we've been looking through Psalm 23, and we've been thinking about what does it look like for us to live the abundant life that is promised to us in a way in Psalm 23, this life that we find from the Good Shepherd, this life that leads us beside quiet waters, that leads us to lie down in green pastures. And this morning we're going to continue on, and we're going to be looking at verse 3, and specifically just the first line of verse 3, which says that he refreshes my soul. That he refreshes my soul. The Lord refreshes my soul. The Good Shepherd refreshes my soul. And I think when we think about our soul, we have all sorts of ideas that are like preconceived ideas about what the soul is or what the soul looks like, right? And for a lot of us, you probably imagine something along the lines of the movie Soul that just came out, right? And if you haven't seen Soul, that probably means you don't have kids or grandkids and you haven't watched it like 30 times at this point. But right in the movie, the way it works is that your soul is just a sort of disembodied, ethereal, kind of otherworldly part of yourself. That it kind of can hang out with other disembodied souls and they can talk and do other disembodied soul things. I don't really remember all the things that happen, but that's kind of the vision behind it, right? Or we often, when we talk about our soul, we only talk about it in the context of the idea that when we die, that one day our soul will go to heaven and our body will be left here to do what bodies do when we die. And those are kinds of the context we think about soul. And I'm not saying either of those obviously is wrong in any way, but what I do think is true is that when David wrote Psalm 23, he wasn't talking about this ethereal version of ourselves, this sort of disembodied version of ourselves. He was talking about himself at the most fundamental level, the essence of who he was. Right? That's what the soul, the idea of the soul, the word soul meant in David's time was this vision, this idea of who you most fundamentally were, who you were created to be. In the New Testament, the word soul that David uses gets translated as psyche into Greek, which means the breath of life, or the thing that animates you, that makes you alive. So our soul, it's the most fundamental element of ourselves. It's the sum of our identity, the culmination of our purpose. It's the image of our design. And it's important to note that David, the psalmist, recognizes that sometimes things happen that leave our soul needing to be refreshed. That somehow, at some point in time, something has happened that has led us away from our identity. Something has happened that has led us away from our purpose, away from our design. And when that happens, we start to feel it. When we've allowed our identity to be twisted, we feel it. When we feel like when we've shied away from our purpose in life, we feel it. When we have gone away from, abandoned our design, we feel it. When I was 19, I felt it all the time, right? I felt it constantly. And you can go and ask almost anyone who was around me regularly at like 19 or 20, and they would tell you that I was the kind of person who had lost sense of my identity, my purpose, my design in life. I was kind of living aimlessly at this point. I slept all day. I stayed up all night. I struggled to do anything important, especially anything related to school. I did my best effort to alienate absolutely everyone who cared about me. And in part, some of that is being 19, right? That's part of that is just what it means to be a 19-year-old, is to try to figure out what's my identity, what's my purpose, what's my design, what have I been designed for? But at the same time, there was something deeper, because it was a denial of who I knew I was supposed to be. This denial of who I knew I was supposed to be. And at the time, I'd gone off to Loyola Marymount. I went to school at Loyola Marymount. I lived in the dorms. I left. I came home. I stopped going to school for a while. And I was living with my parents. And I can remember vividly waking up one morning. It probably wasn't the morning. It felt like morning to me, but it probably wasn't the morning anymore. But I remember waking up, and I woke up, and underneath my door, there was a little 3x5 index card with a note on it that my dad had slid under the door to my room. And so I grabbed it, and on it was a note with a quote from Soren Kierkegaard, who was a 19th century philosopher and theologian. And I should just note, again, that's exactly what you should expect when you're in a mental health crisis and your dad's a philosopher, okay? You get notes from philosophers slid under your door. But the note said this. It said, the most common form of despair is not being who you are. The most common form of despair is not being who you are. And I realized I was in total despair because I wasn't who I was. At least not who I was supposed to be. And I didn't see it at the time. I couldn't see it at the time. But I could feel it. I could feel that I wasn't the person that I knew at some fundamental level I was supposed to be. I wasn't the person who God had created to me. I wasn't living out my identity. I wasn't living out my purpose. I wasn't living out my design. And my guess is that for many of you this morning, you know that feeling. You know what it feels like to continue to make choices over and over and over again that you know aren't choices that you want to make. You know what it feels like to have a purpose in life, but not to do anything about it. You know what it feels like to have been created by God with certain gifts and talents and characteristics, and for whatever reason, you choose to live in opposition to them in an entirely different way. And the invitation of Psalm 23, especially of our verse this morning in verse 3, is that you don't have to feel like that. You don't have to live like that. There is another way. A way that leads us to life and life to the full, to the abundant life that Jesus promises us. And that way is by following the shepherd. Because following Jesus restores you to who you are supposed to be. Following Jesus, following after him, refreshes your soul. It restores your soul. It restores you to the identity you are supposed to have. It restores you to the purpose you are meant to have, to the design you are meant to have. And following Jesus, it's an invitation to return to being who you are. Or for many of us, I think it's often an invitation to just being who you are for the first time. But for some reason, you choose to try to be someone else over and over and over again. I choose to be someone else over and over and over again. We all do. Rather than live the abundant life that the Good Shepherd promises us, we choose to wander off in our own vision of what the best life will look like. Rather than following the shepherd, we chase after financial security. Rather than following the shepherd, we pursue power and status and importance. Rather than following the shepherd, we drink from the well of greed and lust and excess and all sorts of other things that we know Jesus tells us will not lead to an abundant life. And when we do, we begin to lose ourselves. we begin to experience the need for restoration, that things aren't right with our soul, that our lives and who we are don't match up. And Jesus asked this, he said, what good is it to gain the whole world but lose your soul, in Matthew 16. And more often than not, we think about this verse in terms of like our soul going to heaven, right? I'm hoping in this service someone's familiar with this song. In kids ministry, when I was little, we sang a song, right? It was called You Can't Get to Heaven, right? Which is a terrible name for a song. I don't know if that's the actual title, but it's You Can't Get to Heaven in your dirty jeans. Why? Does anyone know? What is this? Did that even happen? Did no one else experience this song in their life? You can't get to heaven in your dirty jeans. Bonnie, thank you, Bonnie. Because God ain't got no washing machines. No one has heard this song? Wow, okay, thank you. Yeah, there's some people who were embarrassed, who weren't saying, great. Oh, okay, not that verse, my bad. You know, the limousine and the gasoline one, yeah, that one would have done it. Okay, great. But we think of Jesus when he talks about what good is it to gain the whole world and lose your soul? We think of it in terms of this, like, don't trade away your soul going to heaven in exchange for something here on earth. Don't trade it away for something small here on earth. But what if Jesus wasn't just talking about your ethereal soul going to heaven one day, but was instead also talking about right here and right now? What good is it to gain all the wealth in the world, but to be at war with yourself? What good is it to be the most respected person at your work, but to feel like you are constantly losing yourself while you're doing it? What good is it to be the most successful of your friends, but to feel like the person you are becoming looks nothing like the person who you are meant to be? I don't know for each of you what tempts you to trade away your soul. What tempts you to trade away who you are at the most fundamental level. I don't know what it is that tempts you to want to give up who you are in exchange for this false vision of what might be a life you want. But I know what it does for me. And most of you know at this point of having to have heard me preach for long enough now that I love history. Right? That's why like almost all of my sermons have historical references in them. But I also love the idea of being a part of history. Right? I love the idea of getting to leave a mark on the world. Right? And I want to be like the Rousseau or the Wesley or the Hamilton or the Roosevelt. And I know that inherently there's nothing wrong with those things. Right? There's inherently nothing wrong with it, just like there's nothing inherently wrong with being successful or being respected. There's nothing inherently wrong with them. But at the same time, I know myself. And I know that I am a little too willing to trade my very self away for that other vision of an abundant life. I'm too willing to be able to kind of give a little bit of who I am in exchange for chasing after that false vision of an abundant life in my own life. And so I'm constantly finding myself making choices that tug at my soul, that tug at who I'm supposed to be, that bring that sort of gnawing sensation back just for a moment. And I have to reassess. Am I following the shepherd still, or have I set off on my own path? Am I following the shepherd as he leads me beside quiet waters, as he makes me lie down in green pastures? Or have I started to make my own path again that is leading me back into despair? And I'm sharing this because I think the reality is that each and every one of us has these places in our lives. We have these places in our lives where we're willing to trade away. Maybe even we're more than willing. Maybe we already have traded away who we are for something else. And if we want the restoration then that David talks about in Psalm 23, then we're going to have to be able to recognize those places. Because restoration requires recognition. If you're unwilling or you're unable to recognize the places where your life and the choices you make are not in line with who you are, then I don't see what the path towards restoration could be. What does it look like to be restored if we're not willing to first recognize the places in our lives where we need that recognition or that restoration? If we're unable to recognize the places where we're trading away our very soul, we're giving up a piece of who we are. If we can't see it, then there's no path forward to restoration. And so before we go any further this morning, the band is going to lead us in one song, and they're going to give us some space to reflect on the places in our lives where our soul needs to be restored. To think through the question, where does your soul need to be restored? And my guess is that for most of us, we feel it at some level. You see it. When I say that, a place has come to mind. But in other cases, the truth is that we made that trade so long ago that we can't even see it anymore. And in those cases, we're going to have to ask God to reveal it to us. The same way that I'm sure that Peter did not recognize that his life as a fisherman was impeding his life of following Jesus until the moment that Jesus showed up and asked him to follow him and leave his nets. The same way that Matthew probably didn't see, or maybe he did, but he didn't do anything about it, that his life as a tax collector was impeding following Jesus until the moment Jesus called him out of it. So we have to take the time to ask Jesus to call us out of these things. To pray like David did, to say, search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me and lead me in the way everlasting. And so I want to give us a moment to do just that. To think about, where are the places, where does your soul need to be restored? And so let's take a second to listen to that still small voice of God and ask him to reveal it to us.
When I run, you run toward me. When I hide, you come find me. Despite my ways, your still small voice, it reminds me. Ever present, always near. Where I go, you're with me. In the darkness of my soul, even there, you're with me. Hallelujah, no more fear, for I am not alone. Oh, I am not alone. Ooh. Apart from you, I am nothing. I long for you and all your glory. Amidst the noise, your still small voice, it reminds me, it reminds me. And ever present, always near. Where I go, you're with me. In the darkness of my soul, even there, you're with me. Hallelujah, no more restore my soul through the valleys, through the shadows. I will fear no evil. You are with me, you anoint me, my heart overflows. For your goodness and mercy always surrounds me. I will dwell with you forevermore. Ever present, always near. Where I go, you're with me. In the darkness of my soul, even there you're with me. I no more fear, for I am not alone. Oh, I am not alone. Ever present, always near. Where I go, you're with me. In the darkness of my soul, even there you're with me. Hallelujah, no more fear, for I am not
Here's the thing is that it can be uncomfortable to recognize the places where our soul, where we have traded away a little bit of our soul. It can be uncomfortable to recognize the places where we're living in a way that doesn't line up with who we are at the most fundamental level. And I don't want to leave you this morning just thinking about the places that you need restoration, because at some level it's uncomfortable, but also I think because Jesus doesn't leave us in that place. But even as I was getting ready for this morning, as I was writing this sermon, I was having trouble. I was sitting there thinking about the places where it became clear in my own life that this was true, feeling the discomfort of that, the burden of that. And I did what, is not advised to do, which was I tried to distract myself a little bit from it. And so I went and I watched a video that's kind of one of my favorite videos, is a video of Bono, who's the lead singer of U2, and Eugene Peterson, who created the Message translation. And it's like a 20-minute video of Bono and Eugene Peterson just talking about the Psalms and the impact that the Psalms have had on their lives. And I was watching it, and in some level as a distraction, but the Spirit moves in some mysterious ways sometimes. And so as I was watching it, I was thinking, I wonder how Mr. Peterson translates this verse for us this morning. And he just says this. It just says it this way. It says, "You let me catch my breath. You let me catch my breath." And it struck me that while I'd been thinking about the places where I needed restoration, where I'd been thinking about the times in my life where I felt like I needed restoration, I could feel this sort of feeling of needing to catch my breath. There's a sort of breathlessness to being in despair. There's a sort of breathlessness to being not who you are, of feeling like you're constantly have to hold your breath, or if not hold it, take those shallow kind of breaths of anxiety and worry, those breaths that are overwhelmed with desperation or isolation or whatever it might be that you're feeling in that moment. But God doesn't leave us in that place. Instead, the Lord lets us take a breath. He lets us take a breath. And one of my favorite stories in the Bible comes out of Ezekiel chapter 37, sorry. And it's the story of this valley of dry bones, as it's called. And I'm just going to read it. It's about 14 verses. I'm going to read through it just for a second. But this is what it says. It says, "The hand of the Lord was on me, and he brought me out by the Spirit of the Lord and set me in the middle of a valley. It was full of bones. He led me back and forth among them, and I saw a great many bones on the floor of the valley, bones that were very dry. He asked me, Son of man, can these bones live? I said, Sovereign Lord, you alone know. Then he said to me, Prophesy to these dry bones and say to them, Dry bones, hear the word of the Lord. This is what the sovereign Lord says to these bones. I will make breath enter you, and you will come to life. I will attach tendons to you and make flesh come upon you and cover you with skin. I will put breath in you, and you will come to life. Then you will know that I am the Lord. So I prophesied as I was commanded, and as I was prophesying, there was a noise, a rattling sound, and the bones came together, bone to bone. I looked, and tendons and flesh appeared on them, and skin covered them, but there was no breath in them. Then he said to me, Prophesy to the breath, prophesy, Son of man, and say to it, This is what the sovereign Lord says. Come, breathe from the four winds and breathe into these slain that they may live. So I prophesied as he commanded me, and breath entered them. They came to life and stood up on their feet, a vast army. Then he said to me, Son of man, these bones are the people of Israel. They say, Our bones are dried up and our hope is gone. We are cut off. Therefore prophesy and say to them, This is what the sovereign Lord says. My people, I am going to open your graves and bring you up from them. I will bring you back to the land of Israel. Then you, my people, will know that I am the Lord when I open your graves and bring you up from them. I will put my spirit in you and you will live, and I will settle you in your own land. Then you will know that I, the Lord, have spoken, and I have done it, declares the Lord. And this morning, I just think I want us to have some time to recognize that the Good Shepherd has come to open up our graves. The Good Shepherd has come to breathe new life into your dry bones and fill you with something new. The Good Shepherd has come to fill you with hope where you have no hope left. You don't have to live the breathless life of constantly being at war with yourself, of denying, of refusing to live as who you really are. Because in Jesus, we have an invitation to follow after him, and experience the life we were designed to live, the life that fulfills our identity, and it fulfills our purpose, and it fulfills our design. The life that is marked by being people who follow after the shepherd and trust that he will lead us into green pastures, that he will lead us to quiet waters, that when we stray from him, he will restore our soul. But to catch our breath, to breathe him in, means we have to follow him. It's in following him that we breathe God in. It's in following him that we experience restoration. It's in following him that we are who we are. It doesn't come apart from trusting the shepherd to guide our paths. We have to be people who choose to breathe him in, to allow him to fill us up, to fill our lungs, to bring our dry bones to life, to restore our souls. People who are willing to cling to the cross, to recognize that Jesus invites us to take up our cross daily and follow after him. That is the life that he has promised us. That is grace that he has given us, that he has invited us not to live at war with ourselves, but to live the life that he created us for. To experience life the way he meant for it to be. To live the abundant life and the life to the full that only following after him can bring. But we have to choose that life. We have to choose to breathe him in, to accept him as our shepherd and as our teacher and as his word, to fill up our lungs with him and his life and his calling and his identity and his purpose and his design for us. And so in a moment, we're going to continue in worship. But I want to just invite you this morning, as you've been thinking about the places in your life where you are not who you are, where your life doesn't look like the person you know God created you to be. And think about, what would it look like for me even this morning to breathe him in, to be made alive, to be filled with hope and this new life that he has for me. So let's worship him together.